The Siege of Daraa occurred within the context of Arab Spring protests in Syria, beginning on 15 March 2011, with Daraa as the center of uproar. The Syrian Army on 25 April started an 11-day siege of the city. This harsh reaction would prove to be another step in the escalation of the Syrian conflict that would eventually escalate into a civil war. The siege involved tanks, helicopters and around 6,000 troops. Up to 244 people were killed, many of them children. Also 81 soldiers were killed, and 1,000 people were arrested. Background: on 15 March 2011, hundreds protested for democracy in Damascus and Aleppo, the largest cities of Syria. This started off a cavalcade of ever larger and angrier demonstrations all around Syria. On Friday, 18 March, demonstrations erupted in 4 cities. The largest protest was in Daraa, where thousands of protesters demanded an end to government corruption. These Daraa protests were repressed by security forces shooting at demonstrators. 7 police officers and at least 4 demonstrators were killed. The city of Daraa remained a focal point for the Syrian protests. On 20 March, thousands took to the streets of Daraa for the third straight day, shouting slogans against the country's emergency law. 15 persons were killed and scores injured as security forces opened fire on protesters. The courthouse, the Baath party headquarters in the city, and the Syria Hotel building owned by Rami Makhlouf, a cousin of President Assad, were then all set on fire. On 23 March, security forces stormed on 1,000 demonstrators near the central Omri Mosque in Daraa, killing at least 37 people. On 8 April, heavy clashes erupted in Daraa between protesters and security forces, in which 27 protesters and 19 soldiers were killed. In the protests on the All-Syrian Great Friday, the 22nd of April, in Daraa 100 demonstrators were killed, according to Al Jazeera. Timeline: between the 25th of April and the 5th of May 2011, the 4th Armored Division of the Syrian Army, led by Mar al-Assad, besieged Daraa, a city of 75,000 to 300,000 inhabitants. Monday, the 25th of April, residents told Before Dawn aid tanks, the first use against protesters since the 15th of March, drove into town with between hundreds and 6,000 troops. They took 3 smaller mosques and tried to conquer the Omri Mosque, which since March had served as a headquarters for demonstrators. Water and electricity and phone lines were cut. Snipers took positions on roofs of mosques and were said to have fired, and a mix of soldiers and armed irregular forces, men with guns and knives, searched house to house for protesters. Dozens were killed in the pre-dawn raid. Bodies were lying in the streets and couldn't be reached without risking being shot at. A resident said over satellite phone, "They want to teach Syria a lesson by teaching Daraa a lesson," he said. Another resident of Daraa said over the phone, according to Arizona Daily Star, "Let Obama come and take Syria. Let Israel come and take Syria. Let the Jews come. Anything is better than Bashar Assad." Quote, according to the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights and another opposition source, the second-in-command of the acting army brigade refused orders to storm the city and was arrested himself. The 26th of April, according to human rights groups, dozens of people in Daraa were arrested by security forces. A resident said over the telephone to Associated Press, "We are being subjected to a massacre. Children are being killed." The 28th of April, Al Jazeera suggested, with amateur video pictures, that soldiers in Daraa refused to shoot at demonstrators, or defected, and then were wounded themselves, perhaps shot by the army, after which they were helped by civilians. The government immediately officially denied any such reports. Today, people in Daraa could still not leave their homes because snipers shot everything that moved, sources said to Al Jazeera. Between 25 and the 28th of April, 42 to 50 people were killed in Daraa by security forces, Al Jazeera and Los Angeles Times estimated. A Daraa resident said, according to the Los Angeles Times, that an entire army division or brigade had broken off and was hiding among the people. The claim could not be verified, due to foreign journalists not being granted access in Syria. Friday, the 29th of April, thousands of protesters from outside tried to enter besieged Daraa. Security forces fired at them and killed 15, sources told Al Jazeera. In total, 33 people were reported killed today in Daraa, said activists. 156 people were arrested, according to the Syrian military. Daraa was now completely surrounded by tanks and armed troops, with snipers still on roofs and even hiding in minarets of mosques, an eyewitness said to Al Jazeera over the phone. Morgues contained today 83 corpses, according to prominent lawyer in Daraa Tamer al-Jahimani. Dead bodies still lay rotting in the streets because collecting them was risking being shot, the eyewitness said to Al Jazeera. The government claimed it was battling extremist and terrorist groups in Daraa and that today 2 soldiers were killed. The 30th of April, Syrian Army troops backed by around 20 tanks and by helicopters, firing tank shells and machine guns and dropping paratroopers on the Omari Mosque, took this mosque that was a focal point for protests since March, killing 6 people, one of them being the son of the mosque's imam, witnesses said. A witness told Al Jazeera that 300 soldiers had defected and joined the protesters, and that there's no food, no medicine, no electricity. We are collecting rainwater to drink. The 1st of May, tanks today fired shells into Daraa's ancient Roman quarter, a resident said. Daraa inhabitants were still confined to their homes, communications still down, the town since the 25th of April still without water, fuel or electricity, unable to leave their homes. Residents chanted, "God is great," to each other from the windows in the evenings, infuriating security forces. A source in Daraa told Al Jazeera that security forces were intensifying the house-to-house searches, and that hundreds of people had been arrested. The government confirmed that 149 people had been arrested in Daraa. The 4th of May, a Syrian military official told that security forces had arrested members of an armed terrorist group in Daraa, where they had found weapons and ammunition hidden underground and in gardens. The 5th of May, the Israeli website Enet News reported that only about 50 people were killed in Daraa since the 25th of April. The Damascus Center for Human Rights Studies today reported that 244 dead bodies of civilians, many of them children, have been transferred from Daraa to the Tishreen military hospital in Damascus. Also 81 dead bodies of soldiers and army officers had arrived from Daraa in that hospital, most of them killed by a gunshot to the back, probably after refusing to shoot civilians, according to DCHRS. An amateur video, reportedly from Daraa, showed dozens of people killed in the streets, people shot through the head. DCHRS speaks of 10 days of massacres in Daraa, and says army units have been using anti-aircraft machine guns to shell houses in central neighborhoods. Since the 30th of April, almost 1,000 men have reportedly been arrested in Daraa, the BBC reports. Syria's state-run news agency and military officials announced that the military had carried out and completed its mission in detaining terrorists and restoring calm to Daraa, and that army units had begun a gradual withdrawal from Daraa. An AFP correspondent saw 350 soldiers, 20 armored personnel carriers and 20 lorries driving out of the city, while witnesses saw a column of around 30 tanks on armored carriers heading north out of Daraa. Army units remained deployed at entrances to the city. Trucks carrying drinking water, food and first aid material, and experts from the Syrian Red Crescent and the International Red Cross delivered the first emergency relief supplies to Daraa. 150 students at the Daraa University held a brief sit-in. The 6th of May, residents insisted the military still remained in force in Daraa, with streets largely subdued and residents afraid to leave their homes. Protesters gathered in Tafiz, 12 kilometers NNW of Daraa, tried to enter Daraa but could not because Daraa was still besieged, according to witnesses. The 7th of May, the Syrian human rights organization Sawasa estimated that during the 11 days siege 220 civilians were killed in Daraa. The Syrian military declared it had pursued members of terrorist groups in and around neighborhoods of Daraa, and arrested people and seized weapons that these groups have used to attack the army and citizens. International reactions. U.S. President Barack Obama, in reaction to the military operation the 25th of April in Daraa, said the U.S. prepared to freeze Syrian officials' American assets. EU countries, including Permanent Security Council members France and the UK, asked the UN Security Council the 25th of April to condemn the Syrian government's use of violence, but it was unclear whether Permanent Council members Russia and China would support that idea. Aftermath. The 9th of May. According to the National Organization for Human Rights in Syria, the Syrian Army used schools and a soccer stadium as makeshift prisons for the hundreds of arrests of recent days. A UN humanitarian assessment mission was not given permission to enter Syria and visit Daraa. The 13th of May, protests erupted in and around besieged Daraa. The 14th of May, Syrian officials announced that soldiers and tanks were being pulled out of Daraa. The 16th of May 2011, the army allowed residents to venture outside the homes for 2 hours a day, a human rights activist said. On the outskirts of Daraa, 2 mass graves were reportedly discovered with 24 and 7 bodies. Within an hour, the Syrian army reportedly took control of the larger site, started removing the corpses and confiscated mobile phones of witnesses. The story could not be independently verified, partly because foreign reporters were not granted access into Syria.